I'm Danny Flexen,
This is Joe Leigh.
and welcome to the latest edition of Who You Backing, our weekly draft-style competition. And as you can see by our respective backgrounds, it is going to be related to the open letter read around the world, sent earlier this week by Frank Warren to his Matchroom counterpart Eddie Hearn, suggesting a number of fights, 9 in total, that the pair could put on together potentially, matching fighters from each of their impressive stables. And I'll list the 9 fights in a minute, but just to let people know how we're going to do it, there's 9 fights been suggested, and we have 3 picks each in turn, depending on who gets the trivia question right or wrong. And we basically, your first pick should be the person you feel is the biggest favourite in these 9 suggested fights. So who you think could be your banker to win out of these 9 fights that have been picked out by Mr. Warren. Joe, what do you think of that?
I'm still surprised, but it needed to happen for British boxing, although obviously Andrade's in there as well. Most of the fights other than that are British fighters, so it needed to happen, but I'm excited it finally has, to be honest, and I can't wait to pick apart each of the fights, regardless of how close or far they are from happening. Let's get on with it.
Now, before we come to the trivia question, let me list the 9 fights that were suggested by Warren. So they are as follows in no particular order.
Yeah.
And we'll go with the Warren fighters first, just because that's how it is on the poster that they sent out. Daniel Dubois against Dillian Whyte, Anthony Yarde against Joshua Buatsi, Joe Joyce against Derek Chisora. Interestingly, Frank Warren said he bumped into Derek Chisora in London yesterday and said, Joe Joyce is looking for you, and Chisora apparently drove off.
Oh, gosh.
Apparently. I don't know how true that is. Liam Williams against Demetrius Andrade, a fight that's already under purse bids. Charlie Edwards, Cal Yafai, been talked about for a long time. Nathan Gorman, Dave Allen. Hamza Shiraz, Ted Cheeseman. Archie Sharp, Zelfa Barrett. And Chris Jenkins, British welterweight champion, against Conor Benn, a fight that nearly happened this month. So they're the 9 fights. Now, whose turn is it this week to pose the trivia question?
I believe it's yours. I do.
Great. I haven't prepared for this at all, but I'll try and think of something off the cuff related to someone on this projected list of fights. Let me see. Who do I know the most about? Could be any of them, really, but no, I don't want to do that. I'm just thinking. Okay, so one of the fights suggested is Ted Cheeseman against Hamza Shiraz.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me 2 of the 3 winning scores by which Ted Cheeseman beat Sam Eggington on Saturday night.
116 to 112, 114 to 100. No, was that?
Come on. You can't give up. You've said 1 already. I don't know if it's right. I haven't checked yet, but 116, 112, and what's your other guess?
I think
you could say that twice if you want.
Yeah, I'm going to go 2 of them, and then...
you only have to get 2 right.
Yeah, 2 of them. 2 of them.
You can go 216, 112. You're so close. It was 115, 114, and the other 2 were both 116, 113. Instead of 8 rounds to 4, it's so 7 rounds to 4 with 1 even. So very, very close.
Oh, well, you can start first, and I'm happy. It's one of these episodes where you could have the first 3 picks, and I'd still be happy with the second 3 because all 9 fights are just really intriguing and interesting. So, yeah, that's all good today. I happily let you start.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm having a look through quickly just to check. I mean, I think it's out of probably 2. Yeah, 2 for me. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to say what the other one is because I don't want to give you any ideas.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go for Joe Joyce, actually.
Okay.
I think although some people who mainly watch their boxing on Sky would be in love or in awe of Derek Chisora, and I think he's a great guy and he's done a lot for the sport. But I think at this stage of their respective careers, and they're both the wrong side of 30, it's fair to say, I think Joe Joyce is fighting, or has been fighting, at a higher level. I think he was a much better amateur. And I think he's still very fresh into his pro career, whereas Chisora's quite late in his. And Chisora's still got to fight Usyk. So if this fight happens, it will be after that. And I expect Usyk to give Del Boy a bit of a pasting, to be fair. And so a kind of partially shop-worn Derek Chisora going up against a fresh, hungry Joe Joyce. And Chisora hasn't got, Carlos Takam would probably disagree, but he hasn't always got that one-shot knockout power, which is, I think, what you would need to get rid of Joe Joyce. He's a pesky operator. He's got volume and energy and aggression and persistence. And I think at this stage of his career, they're the sort of things that Chisora relies upon. So at this stage of their respective careers, I just think he'd have a bit too much for him and too much freshness and youth, if that's all right.
It showed against sort of Dillian Whyte different ways, but the longer the fight went on, obviously Dillian Whyte he knocked him out in the end. It wasn't due to him having the better rounds. It was just due to, I believe, the age and where they were in their career at the time. But it's an interesting first one, to be honest. Is that all you've got to say? Shall I move on now? Or
yeah, you can do your first pick.
So yeah, interesting first one to say. And I think I'm going to go on to the most obvious one, I think, of the card. And it's Dillian Whyte versus Dubois. And this one, I see Dubois getting through Joyce. Unfortunately for Joyce, but I just think the stage Dillian Whyte's at his career, I don't know when this fight's going to happen in the first place, because he's most likely going to just wait around for Fury or whoever holds the...
I think for the purposes of the draft, we have to assume it's either the next fight, or if they've got one lined up, then the one after. And
even if it is that, Dubois is nowhere near the level of experience, that Dillian Whyte does. He's been through the wars. He's been through that stage where he just knocks out everyone. He's got to that high level of opponent where he has to actually box. Whereas with Dubois, he seems like he's knocking everyone out, but that's because of the level he's up against at the moment. So I think when that fight happens, if it does, Whyte comes through that with, not ease, it's going to be a cracking fight, but I think Whyte comes through that with, certainty.
Wow, that's a surprising first pick, I've got to say.
Yeah,
I think quite a few people on social media were picking Dubois in that fight, and
I think
it's a tough one.
Because I know his dad's very hungry and he wants to get his son out there against the big guns. He's called out Wilder already. Like, he wants Dubois out there ASAP with the big guys, but I think he needs to take his time a bit more. It's not saying that I don't think Dubois is ready for a big challenge. I think he's going to get through a lot of the people in the heavyweight division. But for Dillian Whyte, I think he's still got a lot of anger inside him and he's still got a lot to prove. So I don't think he'd let it slip against Dubois.
Okay. All right. Well, that's fair enough. I'll go on to my second pick. And it's all heavyweight so far because I'm picking Nathan Gorman to beat Dave Allen.
The people.
I just think he's a better all-round fighter, to make it pretty simple. And neither of them have been particularly active recently. We haven't seen Allen for a while. Gorman was supposed to be back out on the Josh Taylor show in May the 2nd, but that got postponed because of COVID, of course. And he hasn't been on any of the behind closed door shows. Presumably he'll be on the next tranche of shows in September or October. But just because he lost to Daniel Dubois, I think he's still got a hell of a lot to offer. He was performing well at the level just below that. Just came up against someone who's really going places and just had a bit more power, finishing instincts than he did, but still landed some good shots in that fight. Fought the wrong fight as well, I'd say. He didn't use his boxing skills as much as he could have, and he knows that. But I just think he's still young in his career. He's a bit of an all-rounder. He's got a bit of everything. Yeah. Dave Allen, good fighter, but very erratic. Sometimes performs, sometimes doesn't. I'm sure he'd admit that himself. Sometimes trains, sometimes doesn't, which is probably the biggest problem.
Yeah.
And we don't know how he's going to come back. But he's been found wanting against someone like David Price. I think Price against Gorman would be quite a good competitive fight. So I think, I find it hard to envisage Allen beating Gorman unless he pulls a kind of Lucas Brown type shot. And I mean the shot that beat Lucas Brown, not a shot from Lucas Brown. That kind of body shot that beat Lucas Brown, or the right hand that stunned Nick Webb. If he can pull one of those out of the bag and Gorman's not fast enough to get out of the way of it, then it could be a different story. But I just think Gorman will be better from the experience against Dubois, as hard as it would have been. And I'd pick him to beat Allen 100%.
Gorman versus Price, now you've flagged it up. I think that would be very interesting. But I think he needs to get through someone like Allen first, because against Dubois, he was still very young, and he still is. And I think he needs someone like Allen before he steps up to the level of Price, and then he can potentially move on from there. But I think right now for Allen, not right now for Gorman, sorry, Allen's the perfect match. Of course, now it has to go on to my first pick of the light heavyweight division, and it's going to be Buatsi versus Yard. Buatsi, obviously the smaller of the two. He's got high pace, venom in his shots, sting in his shots. But then you look over at Anthony Yard, he's more accustomed to the world title level now. He's a bigger, stronger fighter out of the two. And I think because of that fight against Kovalev, he's at that world level now. And if this fight does happen, I believe down the line, it probably will be for a world title level with Yard defending it, because it's just a bigger attraction altogether. And I think Yard takes that victory only because I think he's more accustomed to the world level right now. However, never count out Joshua Buatsi.
Well, you've made your bed now, so
I'm
I've made your bed for you.
No, I'm staying in it. I believe that is still a great fight, but I still think
it is a great fight, yeah. But I think you'll be in the minority. I'm not saying Yard doesn't win because I don't have to pick, but I think you'll be in the minority among people watching this. I think most people will pick Buatsi in that fight, but that's fair enough. So my third and final pick, and this is probably the hardest one because they're all so well matched. So credit to Frank Warren for suggesting those. I think I'm going to go for, and I've had two Queensberry fighters so far, so I'm going to go for Ted Cheeseman to beat Hamza Shiraz, and it breaks me a little bit to do it because he's one of my favourite prospects, and I've bigged him up for so long. And I think in a few years' time, the result could be completely different. Yeah. But Hamza's still very, very young and very new in the sport. And Ted Cheeseman, for a 24-year-old, has been through fire several times. Yeah. And he's seasoned and he's rugged. And I think he's learned with his defeats and the draw that he's had. And I just think at this stage, and like I said, we have to assume it's their next fight if they haven't got one lined up, which neither of them have. Cheeseman's just fought. Shiraz has just fought. I think if they fought next time out, I would have to pick Cheeseman. I think the bookies would have Cheeseman a big favourite as well. I think in a year's time or more, that could change.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very, very interesting fight. And Cheeseman's definitely got miles on the clock considering he's only 24. But Hamza Shiraz is very exciting as well. And I think that's a very tough pick for me to call. And I'm glad you picked it, let's just say that.
Yeah, I'm not a heartbreaker, but it's fine.
So moving on to my third pick now, and it's going to be Jenkins versus Ben. Now it's another tough one, but for me, I've been firm in my decision, and I've got to pick Chris Jenkins because as much as Conor Ben's got the bigger name, he gets hit too much in my opinion, and in every fight he's always had a thrilling, exciting fight. So I can't wait to watch it, but not for maybe the right reasons for Ben against someone like Chris Jenkins with the fluid movement and the footwork he's got. He's got a sharp right hand as well. I think Ben's just going to get caught way too much. Jenkins is obviously at British level right now. It's going to be a big step up for Ben, and I'm not counting him out because, like I say, he's involved in brawls, and that means he can often pick out some really nice shots. But as I say, his style is going to cause him problems at higher levels, and I think this will be the level where it shows to really hinder him.
Yeah, I nearly picked Jenkins. He was kind of on the shortlist in my head for that third spot. And the only reason I didn't, or one of the main reasons I didn't at least, is that he cuts in quite a lot of his fights. He cuts quite easily. And the worry is that even if he's miles ahead on points and he's outboxing Conor Benn, I would expect him to outbox Conor Benn for the most part. He could get cut by a punch, after 4 rounds have been completed. Referee on a Matchroom show, doctor... fans, if fans are allowed back in, cheering for Ben. Yeah. And might be tempted to rule it out. But then it depends. I think I'd have to check how the rules have changed. But I think if it's inflicted by a punch in Britain, depending on what title's at stake, I think it is still a stoppage victory rather than going to the scorecards. Accidental head clash is different. But I think if you inflict it by a punch, it would still be a stoppage win, a cuts win. Yeah. Which is a fair enough way to win, but that is what worries me about Jenkins. He must have so much scar tissue around his face now, having been cut in so many fights. Yeah. And I wouldn't rule Ben out just generally anyway, because he's improved. He's physically probably the bigger, stronger guy at that weight. He's improved his defence and his punch selection. And maybe he's just come in at the right time.
Yeah.
but I don't know. That I think that is a genuine 50-50 fight. As are a lot of them, as are probably all the ones that we haven't picked. The three that we haven't picked must be the closest fights. I guess Edwards Jafire, I find that incredibly hard to call. Sharp Barrett, find that really probably
Sharp
more.
Barrett, extremely hard to call. I
I think
think
that's the hardest one. And Williams Andrade, I could see
I was going to ask you
both of
about.
them like winning conclusively. Like I could
Yeah.
see Williams going in, bobbing and weaving under those long arms and
I
just
think
destroying him.
I could see that happening.
Yeah, but I could also see Andrade just like spoiling and making it an ugly fight and just never letting Williams into it. So I could see both things. So
I
that's why
mean,
that one's really hard. But I haven't decided who I think is going to win yet. Let's see what happens when it actually comes to the fight and where it's staged and what they look like on the scales and all that sort of stuff.
yeah, there's a lot more things to take into consideration before, of course. But as you mentioned there, it could go one or two ways. I think that one is for me, it's the 50-50.
So to recap, in terms of our Matchroom versus Queensberry bankers, I've got Joe Joyce to beat Derek Chisora, Nathan Gorman to beat Dave Allen, and Ted Cheeseman to beat Hamza Shiraz.
And I've got Dillian White to beat Daniel Dubois, Anthony Yard to beat Joshua Buatsi, and Chris Jenkins to beat Conor Benn.
Right, guys, let us know what you think below. Who won the draft? Most importantly, you know who's got the best trio of bankers. That is bankers with a B.
Yeah.
And also let us know who you think is going to come out on top in all 9 fights. You know, it's not like you're going to win a prize or anything because there's no way, and I can say this categorically, there's no way all 9 of these fights will happen.
Yeah.
But let's hope some of them do. But just tell us who you think is going to win the 9 fights and why, or just pick out the few that you like the best and decide who's going to win and why.
For sure. Definitely let us know in the comments because there's some of them that you think could go one way, some of them could go the other, and it's just I'm still surprised it's happening, but I can't wait to see if any of these go down. I think around 5 or 6 of them could go down, and then 3 or 4 I'm thinking there's no chance these are happening, but let us know.
Brilliant. All right, well, guys, we'll see you next week for the next Who You Back In. We'll look forward to that.
Thank you.